The blizzard came down from the Sandia Mountains like the wrath of God himself, and Isaiah Vaughn knew his cattle would be huddled in the lower pastures by now. But he had not expected his two shepherd dogs to come scratching at his cabin door with snow caked so thick on their fur he could barely see their eyes. It was December of 1881, and the winter had already proven itself meaner than most in the high country outside Placitas, New Mexico, where the elevation made even the hardiest ranchers question their choices when storms like this rolled through. Isaiah pulled open the heavy wooden door and the dogs burst inside, shaking and whining in a way that made his gut tighten with concern because Ranger and Scout were not the kind of animals to spook easily. "What is it?" he asked them, knowing full well they could not answer but reading their agitation like words on a page. They turned circles near the door, scratching at it again, and Ranger let out a sharp bark that echoed through the small cabin. Isaiah grabbed his heavy coat from the peg by the door, wrapped a wool scarf around his face, and pulled on his leather gloves before stepping out into the screaming wind. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, and the snow was coming down so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. The dogs immediately started running toward the eastern ridge, looking back to make sure he was following, and Isaiah trudged after them through snow that was already past his knees in the drifts. They led him nearly a quarter-mile from the cabin, which felt like miles in the blinding white, and at first he thought he was seeing things when he spotted the dark shape against the snow. But as he got closer, his heart dropped into his stomach because it was a person, a woman from the looks of it, lying face down in a drift with her dark hair spread around her like a fan. Her dress was thin, completely inadequate for this weather, and her lips were blue when he turned her over gently. For a terrible moment he thought she was dead, but then he saw the faintest rise and fall of her chest and felt the weak flutter of a pulse at her throat. "Jesus Christ," Isaiah muttered, and without another thought he scooped her up in his arms, alarmed at how light she felt, how cold her skin was even through her clothes. The dogs led the way back, breaking trail through the snow, and Isaiah moved as fast as he dared, his arms burning with effort but refusing to slow down because every second out here was another second closer to death for this woman. By the time he kicked open his cabin door and stumbled inside with her, his lungs were screaming and ice had formed in his beard. He laid her down on the rug in front of the fireplace, which still had a good blaze going, and immediately started working to save her life. Her clothes were soaked through and frozen in places, so he knew he had to get her out of them, or the wet fabric would steal what little warmth she had left. His hands shook as he worked, not from the cold but from the urgency of it all, and he tried not to think about the impropriety of undressing an unconscious woman as he peeled away the frozen layers. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then filled his 2 largest pots with water and set them on the stove to heat, knowing he needed to warm her gradually or risk shocking her system. While the water heated, Isaiah knelt beside her and chafed her hands and feet, trying to get blood flowing back into her extremities. Her fingers were so pale they looked almost translucent, and he feared frostbite had already set in. The dogs lay down nearby, watching with worried eyes, and Isaiah found himself talking to the woman even though she could not hear him. "You are going to be all right," he said, more to convince himself than anything. "I do not know who you are or how you ended up out there, but you are safe now. Do you hear me? You are safe." He lost track of time as he worked. When the water was warm but not hot, he soaked towels in it and wrapped them around her feet and hands, replacing them as they cooled. He spooned warm broth between her lips, and though most of it dribbled back out, some of it went down. He added more wood to the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. And slowly, achingly slowly, color began to return to her face. Her breathing grew stronger, more regular, and sometime around midnight her eyelids began to flutter. Isaiah was dozing in his chair, exhausted from the effort, when he heard a soft sound. His eyes snapped open, and he found himself looking into the most striking pair of green eyes he had ever seen. The woman was staring at him with confusion and fear, and she tried to sit up but immediately fell back with a gasp of pain. "Easy," Isaiah said, moving to kneel beside her. "Do not try to move too fast. You were caught out in the blizzard. My dogs found you half frozen to death." She looked at him for a long moment, then down at herself wrapped in blankets, and a flush of color came to her cheeks as she realized she was not wearing her own clothes. Isaiah had dressed her in one of his old shirts after her own things had been stripped away. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from cold. "My cabin, about 3 miles outside Placitas. I am Isaiah Vaughn. What is your name?" She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had passed out again, but then she spoke. Josephine Jenkins." "Well, Miss Jenkins, you are lucky to be alive. What were you doing out there in weather like this?" Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "The stage. We were traveling from Santa Fe to Albuquerque when the storm hit. The wheel broke and the stage overturned. I think the driver was killed. The other passengers, I do not know. I tried to find help, but I got turned around in the snow." Isaiah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Where did this happen? How far from here?" "I do not know. I walked for so long I thought I was going to die." "You nearly did." Isaiah stood and moved to the window, but he could see nothing through the blowing snow. "The storm is still too bad to go looking for survivors tonight, but come first light I will ride out and see what I can find." "You would do that?" Josephine asked, struggling to prop herself up on one elbow. "Of course I would, but right now you need to rest and get your strength back. When did you last eat a proper meal?" "Yesterday morning, I think. Everything is a blur." Isaiah moved to his small kitchen and began pulling out supplies. "I will make you some stew. Your body needs fuel to recover from what it has been through." As he cooked, Isaiah was acutely aware of Josephine watching him. He was not used to having anyone in his cabin, especially not a woman, and definitely not a beautiful woman who was currently wearing his shirt. He had lived alone for the past 3 years, ever since he had saved enough money working cattle drives to buy this piece of land and build his cabin. At 26, most men his age were married with children, but Isaiah had always been too focused on building his ranch to think much about courting. "How long have you lived out here alone?" Josephine asked, as if reading his thoughts. 3 years. It is not much yet, but I have got 20 head of cattle, some chickens, and the dogs. I am building something that will last. It must get lonely." Isaiah shrugged, stirring the pot. "I have the animals for company, and I ride into town once a week for supplies and to check on things. It is a simple life, but it is mine." "I think it sounds nice," Josephine said softly. "Having something that belongs to you, I mean." There was something in her tone that made Isaiah turn to look at her. "Where were you headed? Do you have family in Albuquerque?" She shook her head. "I was going to work as a governess for a family there. I answered an advertisement in the newspaper. My parents died last year of fever, and I had to sell our farm outside Santa Fe to pay the debts they left behind. The governess position was supposed to be a new start." Isaiah's chest tightened with sympathy. "I am sorry about your parents." "Thank you." She wiped at her eyes. "I do not even know if the family is still expecting me. The stage was supposed to arrive 2 days ago." "We will sort it out," Isaiah said with more confidence than he felt. "For now, you need to focus on recovering." He brought her a bowl of stew and helped her sit up enough to eat. Her hands were still shaky, so he ended up holding the spoon for her, feeling like an awkward fool but doing it anyway because she needed the help. When she had eaten as much as she could manage, he settled her back down in the blankets and added another log to the fire. "You should take your bed," Josephine said. "I cannot take it from you. You are not taking anything. I will be fine in the chair." When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "Miss Jenkins, I am a rancher. I have slept in far worse places than a comfortable chair by a warm fire. Do not argue with me on this." The corners of her mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "You are very stubborn, Mr. Vaughn, so I have been told." The storm continued to rage through the night, and Isaiah dozed fitfully in his chair, waking every hour or so to check on Josephine and tend the fire. Each time he looked at her, he found himself struck by the miracle of her survival. If his dogs had not found her, if he had not followed them out into the blizzard, she would surely be dead by now. The thought made something tighten in his chest, a feeling he could not quite name. By morning the wind had died down, though snow still fell in steady curtains. Isaiah bundled up and went out to check on his animals, making sure the chickens were secure in their coop and breaking ice on the water trough. His cattle were huddled together in the shelter of a rock outcropping, looking miserable but alive. He forked hay to them, then made his way back to the cabin, his mind already working through the problem of how to find the overturned stage in all this snow. Josephine was awake when he came back inside, sitting up with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked better, he thought, less like a ghost and more like a living woman. Her dark hair hung in waves around her face, and in the light of morning he could see that she was probably close to his own age, maybe a year or two younger. "How are you feeling?" he asked, stamping snow off his boots. "Sore everywhere, and my hands and feet burn, but better than last night. I cannot believe I am alive. You are tougher than you look." Isaiah poured coffee and brought her a cup, then settled into his chair with his own. "I am going to ride out and look for the stage as soon as the snow lets up a bit more. Can you remember anything about where you were when it overturned? Any landmarks?" Josephine frowned, concentrating. "There was a rock formation that looked like a tower, I think. And we had been following the road through a canyon, but I do not know how far I walked after that." "A rock formation like a tower," Isaiah repeated. "That could be Chimney Rock, which would put you on the road between Santa Fe and Albuquerque, probably about 5 or 6 miles from here." He set down his coffee cup. "I will saddle my horse and go take a look. You should stay here where it is warm. Please be careful," Josephine said, and the genuine concern in her voice made Isaiah's heart skip. "I will. You just rest and get your strength back." He saddled his bay gelding, a sturdy animal named Copper who had never let him down, and rode out into the snow with Ranger and Scout ranging ahead. The world was eerily quiet, muffled by the thick blanket of white, and Isaiah had to rely on his knowledge of the land to navigate because most of the familiar landmarks were obscured. He found the main road, or what he thought was the main road, and followed it west toward where Chimney Rock should be. It took him nearly 2 hours of searching before Scout started barking, and Isaiah urged Copper forward to find the overturned stage half buried in a drift. The horses were gone, probably scattered by the storm, and when Isaiah forced open the door he found 2 bodies inside, frozen solid. One was an older man, probably the driver, and the other was a woman clutching a carpet bag. He said a quick prayer for their souls, knowing there was nothing he could do for them now except report their deaths to the sheriff in Placitas. He searched the area for any other survivors but found none, and as he rode back toward his cabin, Isaiah felt the weight of those deaths like stones in his chest. Josephine had been so close to joining them. If she had not tried to walk for help, If the cold had taken her a few minutes sooner, if his dogs had not found her trail, she would be frozen out there with the others. When he got back to the cabin, Josephine looked up anxiously from where she sat by the fire. Isaiah shook his head slowly and her face crumpled. "I am so sorry," he said. "I found the stage. The driver and one other passenger did not make it. You were the only survivor." She put her face in her hands and wept, and Isaiah stood there awkwardly for a moment before crossing the room and kneeling beside her. He put a tentative hand on her shoulder, meaning to offer comfort, and she turned and pressed her face against his chest, sobbing. Isaiah wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried for the people who had died, for the terror she had survived, for everything she had lost. "It is not fair," she said between sobs. "That woman, she had children waiting for her in Albuquerque. She showed me their picture. And the driver was such a kind man. Why did I survive when they did not? I do not know," Isaiah said honestly. "Sometimes there is no reason for these things, but you did survive, and that means something. You have to keep living for yourself and for them." She pulled back and looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I do not even know what I am supposed to do now. I have no job, no family, barely any money. What am I going to do?" "First, you are going to recover," Isaiah said firmly. "Then we will figure out the rest. You can stay here as long as you need to. I will ride into Placitas tomorrow and report what happened to the sheriff. Maybe he will have some ideas about what you should do next. I cannot impose on your hospitality like that." "You are not imposing," I offered. He stood up and moved back to his chair, suddenly aware that he had been holding her for longer than was probably proper. "Besides, I cannot in good conscience turn you out until you are fully recovered. Your hands and feet still need time to heal, and you have been through a terrible ordeal." Over the next few days, a routine developed between them. Isaiah would wake early and tend to his animals and his morning chores, then come back inside to make breakfast for both of them. Josephine's strength returned gradually, and soon she was insisting on helping around the cabin despite his protests. She mended his shirts, which had been missing buttons for months. She reorganized his pantry and cooked meals that were far better than anything Isaiah had managed on his own. And they talked, long conversations that stretched through the evenings as they sat by the fire. Isaiah learned that Josephine had been raised on a small farm, that she loved books but had never had many to read, that she could play the piano though she had not touched one in years. She learned that Isaiah had grown up in Texas, that he had left home at 18 to work cattle drives, that he dreamed of building his ranch into something substantial enough to support a family someday. They discovered they both loved the early morning quiet, both preferred coffee to tea, both believed in hard work and keeping your word. And somewhere in those conversations, something shifted between them. Isaiah found himself watching Josephine when she was not looking, admiring the way the firelight caught in her hair, the graceful way her hands moved when she talked. He found himself taking extra care with his appearance, shaving more carefully and making sure his clothes were clean. He found himself looking forward to coming back inside after his morning chores because it meant seeing her smile. Josephine felt it too, though she tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, but it was more than that. It was the way Isaiah listened when she talked, really listened, as if her words mattered. It was the gentleness in his hands when he checked her healing fingers for signs of frostbite. It was the way he treated her with respect, never making her feel like a burden even though she knew she was disrupting his solitary life. It was the sound of his laugh, rare but wonderful when she managed to coax it out of him. A week after she had arrived, the weather finally cleared enough for Isaiah to make the ride into Placitas. Josephine watched from the cabin window as he rode away, and she was surprised by how empty the cabin felt without him. She busied herself with chores, but her mind kept drifting to him, wondering what he was doing when he would return. Isaiah rode into Placitas feeling strangely reluctant, which made no sense because he had always enjoyed his weekly trips to town. He reported the stage accident to Sheriff Morrison, who promised to send men out to recover the bodies once the roads were more passable. He picked up supplies at the general store, where Mrs. Patterson grilled him with questions about the mysterious woman everyone had heard he had rescued. "She is recovering well," Isaiah said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "And what are her plans?" Mrs. Patterson asked, not bothering to hide her curiosity. "I do not know yet. We are still figuring that out. Well, if she needs work, my sister in town is looking for help at her boarding house. It is not governess work, but it is respectable employment." Isaiah filed that information away, though the thought of Josephine leaving to work at a boarding house made his stomach twist. He thanked Mrs. Patterson and finished his shopping, then rode back toward his cabin with his saddlebags full of supplies and his head full of thoughts he was not quite ready to examine. When he got back, Josephine had dinner waiting, and the cabin smelled like fresh bread and roasted chicken. She smiled when he walked in, a smile that lit up her whole face, and Isaiah felt something in his chest crack open. "How was town?" she asked. "Fine. The sheriff is going to send men to recover the bodies from the stage, and Mrs. Patterson at the general store mentioned that her sister has a boarding house in Placitas and needs help if you are interested." Josephine's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, that is kind of her. You do not have to decide anything right now," Isaiah said quickly. "I just thought you should know there are options." They ate dinner making awkward small talk, and the easy comfort that had developed between them over the past week felt strained. That night, Isaiah lay in his chair unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and finally admitting to himself what he had been trying to deny. He was falling in love with Josephine Jenkins, and the thought of her leaving made him feel like he was being torn in half. But what could he offer her? A rough cabin in the middle of nowhere, a ranch that was barely profitable, a life of hard work and isolation. She deserved better than that. She deserved a proper house in town, nice dresses, a comfortable life. She had already lost so much. How could he ask her to give up even more to stay here with him? Josephine was having similar thoughts as she lay wrapped in blankets by the fire. She knew she should start planning her next steps, should take Mrs. Patterson up on her offer and move into town to start rebuilding her life. But the thought of leaving this cabin, of leaving Isaiah, felt wrong in a way she could not articulate. In just 1 week, this place had started to feel like home. Isaiah had started to feel like home. But she could not impose on his generosity forever, and she could not assume that the connection she felt was anything more than one-sided. He had saved her life and given her shelter, but that did not mean he wanted her to stay permanently. For all she knew, he was eager to return to his solitary life, and was too polite to say so. The tension between them grew over the next few days, unspoken but heavy in the air. They were both more careful with their words, more formal with each other, and the easy warmth that had characterized their conversations disappeared. Finally, on a cold afternoon nearly 2 weeks after Josephine's arrival, Isaiah could not take it anymore. He was outside chopping wood when Josephine came out wrapped in his spare coat, which was far too big for her. She stood watching him for a moment, then spoke. "Isaiah, I have been thinking. I should go into Placitas and speak to Mrs. Patterson's sister about that job. I have taken advantage of your hospitality long enough." Isaiah brought the axe down harder than necessary, splitting the log cleanly. "You have not taken advantage of anything. Still, I cannot stay here forever. You have your own life to live." He set down the axe and turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "What if I do not want you to go?" "What?" Isaiah took a step toward her, then another. "What if I asked you to stay, not as a guest, but as something more?" Josephine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Isaiah, I do not understand what you are saying." "I am saying that these past 2 weeks with you here have been the best of my life. I am saying that the thought of you leaving makes me feel like I cannot breathe. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Josephine, and I know I have no right to ask, but I am asking anyway. Stay with me. Marry me. Help me build this ranch into something real." Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "You love me." "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. I know I do not have much to offer you right now. This cabin is small and the work is hard and the winters are brutal. But I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I will build you a proper house. I will buy you all the books you want to read. I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Josephine crossed the space between them and threw her arms around his neck. "You foolish man, I do not care about a bigger house or fancy things. I care about you. I have been in love with you since you held me while I cried, maybe even before that. I would rather spend my life in this cabin with you than in a mansion with anyone else." Isaiah pulled back just enough to look at her face, needing to see the truth in her eyes. What he saw there made his heart soar. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her, gentle at first and then with more passion as she kissed him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaiah pressed his forehead to hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That is a yes to everything. I will marry you, Isaiah Vaughn. I will stay with you and build a life with you and love you for as long as we both live." They went into Placida's the next day to speak to the circuit preacher, who agreed to marry them the following Sunday. The town was abuzz with gossip about the whirlwind romance, but Isaiah and Josephine did not care what anyone else thought. Mrs. Patterson, who had a soft heart beneath her nosy exterior, insisted on making Josephine a proper wedding dress, and several of the other town women pitched in to help. On a bright Sunday morning in early January of 1882, Josephine Jenkins became Josephine Vaughn in a small ceremony at the Placida's church. She wore a simple but beautiful dress of cream-colored wool, and Isaiah wore his best suit, which he had not put on since leaving Texas years ago. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance wiped tears from their eyes. They rode back to the cabin together, Josephine sitting in front of Isaiah on copper, and when they arrived, Isaiah insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife for the first time, Josephine traced the lines of Isaiah's face with her fingers. "I still cannot believe this is real," she whispered. "2 weeks ago I was dying in the snow. Now I am married to the man I love." "Believe it," Isaiah said, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "You are mine now and I am yours. Nothing is going to change that." The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Isaiah taught Josephine to ride, and she learned to help him with the ranch work. They spent long evenings by the fire reading together from the books Isaiah bought her on his trips to town. They made plans for the future, dreaming of the house they would build, the cattle they would raise, the children they hoped to have someday. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the high country green. Isaiah worked from dawn until dusk, determined to make good on his promise to provide for Josephine. He increased his herd, built a proper barn, and started clearing land for the bigger house he had promised. Josephine planted a garden and started raising chickens for eggs to sell in town. It was hard work, But they did it together, and that made all the difference. In late summer, Josephine told Isaiah she was pregnant. He whooped with joy and spun her around in his arms, then immediately set her down and asked if spinning her was bad for the baby. She laughed and kissed him and told him she was not made of glass. That winter, as snow once again blanketed the ranch, their son was born. They named him James, and Isaiah held the tiny baby with shaking hands, overwhelmed by love for this child and the woman who had given him the gift of fatherhood. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a red-faced bundle they named Clara. By then, Isaiah had finished the new house, a solid 2-story structure with a real parlor and separate bedrooms and a kitchen big enough for Josephine to move around comfortably. The ranch was thriving, with a herd of 50 cattle and a reputation for quality stock. They had hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Tom who lived in the bunkhouse Isaiah had built. On the 5th anniversary of the day Isaiah's dogs had found Josephine in the snow, they stood together on the porch of their house watching their children play in the yard. James was 4 now, already showing signs of his father's sturdy build and serious nature. Clara was 2, with her mother's dark hair and green eyes and a mischievous streak that kept them both on their toes. "You ever think about that day?" Josephine asked, leaning against Isaiah's side. "Which day?" "The day I nearly died, the day that changed everything." Isaiah wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "I think about it all the time. I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you. If the dogs had not found you, if the storm had been just a little bit worse, if I had decided not to follow them out into the cold. But you did follow them. You saved my life. And you saved mine right back. I was so lonely before you came, Josephine. I did not even realize how lonely I was until you were here, and suddenly everything was brighter and better and made sense in a way it never had before." She turned in his arms and kissed him, a kiss that still made her heart race even after 5 years of marriage. "I love you, Isaiah Vaughn." "I love you too, Josephine Vaughn. More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." They stood there holding each other as the sun set over the Sandia Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red and purple. James ran over and tugged on his father's pants leg, asking to be picked up, and Isaiah swung him up onto his shoulders. Clara toddled over and Josephine scooped her up, settling the little girl on her hip. The ranch continued to prosper over the years. Isaiah became known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and a skilled cattleman. Josephine became beloved in Placitas for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone in need. When a fever swept through town, she opened their home to nurse the sick. When a neighboring family lost their barn to fire, Isaiah and his men helped rebuild it. They raised their children to be strong and kind, to work hard and treat others with respect. James grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Clara grew into a spirited young woman who could rope a steer as well as any man but also played the piano beautifully, having inherited her mother's love of music. In time, 2 more children joined the family. Sarah, born when Clara was 5, and Isaac, born 2 years after that. As the years passed and they grew older, Isaiah and Josephine would often sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their life together. They had known sorrow, as all people do. They had lost friends to illness and accident, had seen hard years when drought threatened their livelihood, had nursed each other through injuries and sickness. But through it all, their love had remained constant, a foundation that nothing could shake. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together friends from all over the territory. People danced and ate and told stories late into the night, And when Isaiah and Josephine finally escaped the crowd to steal a moment alone, they walked hand in hand to the place where the dogs had found her all those years ago. "I still cannot believe that scared, half-frozen girl turned into this," Josephine said, gesturing back toward the house where light and laughter spilled from every window. "A home, a family, a life I never could have imagined." "I always saw it," Isaiah said. "From the moment I looked into your eyes and saw you fighting to live, I knew you were strong enough to build something extraordinary. We built it together. Yes, we did." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. After a while, they walked back to the party hand in hand, back to the life they had created together from nothing but love and determination, and a miracle rescue in a blizzard. Years continued to pass, marked by the births of grandchildren and the quiet satisfaction of watching their ranch become a legacy. Isaiah trained James to take over the day-to-day operations, teaching him everything he knew about cattle and horses and the land. Josephine taught her daughters to be self-sufficient and strong, to never depend on anyone else for their happiness, but to choose partners who made them better. When Isaiah turned 50, he finally agreed to slow down a bit, letting James handle more of the heavy work while he focused on the business side of the ranch. He and Josephine spent more time together, taking rides through the high country, visiting their children and grandchildren, simply enjoying the life they had built. They grew old together with the same grace and partnership that had characterized their entire marriage. On their 40th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching yet another sunset, Josephine reached over and took Isaiah's hand. His hair was white now, his face lined with years of sun and weather, but his eyes still held the same warmth and love they had shown on the day he proposed to her in the snow. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For following your dogs out into that blizzard. For not giving up on me when you found me. For loving me all these years." Isaiah squeezed her hand gently. "Josephine, you have been the greatest blessing of my life. I would walk through 1,000 blizzards if it meant finding you again. We have had a good life, haven't we? The best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, secure in the love that had sustained them through decades, in the knowledge that they had built something that would outlast them both. Their children were strong and happy, their grandchildren healthy and loved, their ranch prosperous and well-run. They had started with nothing but a desperate rescue in a snowstorm, and had turned it into a legacy of love and family that would endure for generations. As the stars began to appear, Isaiah and Josephine went inside to the warmth of their home, their hands still clasped together just as they had been on the day they married, just as they would be for all the days remaining to them. They had found each other against impossible odds, had chosen each other when they could have walked away, had built a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger each time. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the size of their ranch or the number of their cattle or the money in their bank account, but the love they shared and the family they had created together. It was a love story that had begun with tragedy and terror, with a woman dying in the snow and a man brave enough to venture out into a blizzard to save her. And it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something true. Years later, after both Isaiah and Josephine had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their children would tell the story of how they met to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They would talk about the blizzard, and the dogs and the desperate rescue, about the cabin where their parents had fallen in love, about the ranch that had grown from nothing into something substantial. And those children would grow up knowing that true love was possible, that it could survive any hardship, and that sometimes the greatest blessings in life came from the most unlikely circumstances. The ranch remained in the Vaughn family for generations, passed down from parents to children, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But they all knew where it had started, on a cold December night in 1881, when a cowboy named Isaiah Vaughn followed his dogs out into a blizzard and found a woman named Josephine Jenkins half dead in the snow. He had carried her inside and saved her life, never knowing that in doing so, he was saving his own life too, finding the love and partnership that would define the rest of his days. It was a story of survival and second chances, of love found in the unlikeliest of places, of two people who had been brought together by fate and had chosen to build something lasting from that chance meeting. It was a story that proved that even in the hardest times, even in the coldest winters, even when death seemed certain, hope could survive. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, hope could transform into love, and love could transform into a lifetime of happiness. The Vaughn Ranch stood as a testament to that truth, its fences straight and strong, its buildings well maintained, its cattle healthy and numerous. And on cold winter nights when the snow came down from the Sandia Mountains, the family would gather around the fire and remember the blizzard that had brought their family into being, grateful for the courage of a man who had followed his dogs into a storm and the strength of a woman who had refused to give up even when death seemed certain. Their love story had become legend, passed down through the years, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things could come from the most ordinary act of human kindness, and that true love, once found, could withstand anything the world threw at it.